Okay, I think we're live. Awesome. Welcome everyone to the very first event of FESTA, Revolt FESTA 2021. We are starting off with our Revolt Book Club Live for I Am Army, which was edited by Walia Eaglehawk and Courtney Lazor. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Okay, I got it. Awesome. Um, and we are also joined by Lily and Karen and myself, who have also authored chapters in the book. And we are just going to be discussing a little bit more about it. It's now been a couple of months since I Am Army was released in September. So I guess if we could get started in terms of everyone introducing themselves and where they're joining us from, which chapter you wrote, and if you could choose one color to describe your chapter, what would that color be? And you can throw in why if you'd like.
All right, I guess I'll go first. Hello, everyone. My name is Willie Eaglehawk. I am the co-editor of I Am Army, and I also contributed 3 chapters, but today I will just talk about my auto-ethnography called I Am Army, I Am Revolutionary. I am from Australia, by the way. It is 8 o'clock in the morning here. It's going to be a lovely hot day, so if you see me sweating a lot, it's because I'm having a great time. If I could pick a color for my chapter, I mean, Madeline and I were discussing this yesterday, and we agreed that calling any of our chapters like saying it's purple is a bit of a cop out, but wait for Madeline's answer to see how much she cops out. So I will choose the color red because mine is about revolution. And for some reason, when I think about revolution, I think about red. But now that we are branded as revolutionaries, I also think of our very elegant plum color. So somewhere on that like purple to red spectrum, that would be the color of my chapter. Red with passion, not with blood. That is our motto here at Revolutionaries. All right, over to you, Courtney.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Courtney Lazor. I co-edited and also wrote a chapter. My chapter is called Finding BTS Gave Me Back Myself. We're going to pretend like I didn't have to look at the book. It's been a long work day, so we're going to pretend like I knew that off the top of my head. Yeah, I'm from Virginia in the United States, and I was trying to think of a color because I don't know. I feel like I'm not good at matching colors to things, but the first thing that came to mind is like a mint green, like light teal color. And the reason I think of that is because a lot of my chapter was more about like personal journey and sort of a healing process. And I think of that as a healing color. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody but me, but it makes sense to me. So.
All right, Lily, I'm picking you. Go next.
Hi, I'm Lily. I'm joining you from Malaysia, which is a country in Southeast Asia. So it's 6 a.m. over here. I wrote chapter 5, which is how BTS contributes towards an awareness of myself. I have to check because it's too long. So the color that I would think most represent my chapter is turquoise because it's not exactly a dark blue or a light blue. It's kind of an in between, and that kind of describes my chapter because my chapter evolves from processing something to trying to process it. So from not processing it at all, it becomes trying to. So I would say it's turquoise. So yeah.
Wonderful. All right, it's over to you, Karen.
Hi. Hi, I'm Karen. I'm from Brunei. So this is also in Southeast Asia. It's the start of the day for us at 6 p.m. So at 6 a.m. So it's now 6:04 a.m. My chapter title is fortunately short. I forgot it for a bit. I think it's Army as Feminist Identity. Okay, I don't think I know it is. Color for my chapter, I had to think about this for a bit. I don't really, my brain doesn't work that way, but if I had to choose, because my laptop is a peacock purple color, and I stared at my laptop a lot while I was writing the chapter, so that seems to be like a nice, appropriate like color background for the chapter. So yeah.
All right, I guess that means I'm up. I'm Manilyn Gumapis. Recently started as Communications Director for Revolutionaries shortly after I Am Army was released in September. I'm joining us here today from Chicago, or at least the Chicago suburbs, so it's about 4 p.m. for me. And I wrote the chapter From Fake Love to Self-Love. And okay, yeah, Walia had every right to call me out for my color selection, because my color selection for my chapter, it's not purple, but I can't think of anything else but the album cover colors for Love Yourself Answer. Because yes, if you've read my chapter From Fake Love to Self-Love, it is structured entirely around the Love Yourself series. And so that gradient of just pinks and blues and peaches, this idea of like serenity and healing, is ultimately what my chapter ends up at. So that's what I would choose for my chapter.
You know what's really funny is that everyone else has the same kind of color scheme, and then I'm red.
I did notice that. I was like, ooh. And then also I was thinking when you were talking about red with love, not, or red with passion, not blood. There was a performance, wasn't there, of with Namjoon wearing like that mesh top that said red with love or something like that. I don't know if that...
Thank you for reminding me.
Yes, yeah. I wasn't sure that was part of, like intentionally part of it, but I couldn't help but think of that.
It is now.
Yes. So I also want to say to all of our viewers, as we are, just as we are going along with this panel, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to share anything and everything in the comments section, no matter where you're joining us from. Especially, is it just YouTube that shows up live for us, or is it everything, Walia? Everything? Okay, awesome. So we'll be able to see it, so go ahead and leave us questions. Yes, we do love red, and hello. So we're going to start off with some questions. We'll have time for each of the panelists to speak on their chapters, as well as some general questions that each of us can answer to. But first of all, let's start off with Walia. How did you come up with the idea for I Am Army? And what was the I Am Army process for you specifically, both as editor and author of not just one, but 2 chapters in the book?
Thank you, Manilyn. All right. Well, how did I come up with this? Let me think about it. I'm just going to mute you, Manilyn, so I don't have to hear myself. All right, there we go. I don't hear my voice anymore. Fantastic. I feel so much better. Okay, so how did I come up with this idea? So for those of you who don't know, I am the CEO of Revolutionaries. We are an independent book publishing company based in Australia, but operating internationally, as you can see from everyone on the screen here, and as you'll see throughout FESTA over the weekend. When I first set about kind of putting into place what I wanted to see in Revolutionaries as a company, I really made sure that I was situating the company in fandom, because I am in fandom, I'm an army, and I wanted to reflect my own journey to becoming an army, and not only becoming an army, but accepting the army identity. One of my core values is storytelling. I believe that everybody has a story, and that I see value, intrinsic value, in everyone's stories. And this is even more so within the army fandom. I think we have so many amazing stories to share, and I wanted to create a platform and a space for people to come and speak themselves in accordance to the teachings of BTS as part of a Love Yourself process. So I came up with the idea for I Am Army while I was writing my first book, Idle Limerence. There is a part in Idle Limerence called Army, where the main character Echo goes through the process of accepting that she is an army, and she does have a part where she says, I am army, we are one, I get that now. So that was kind of a reflection of my own internal process. And then I wanted to find a way to connect with other army to share their stories in a way that wasn't just a story. I wanted it to be an autoethnography. So the idea behind an autoethnography, I'm going to explain this in very basic terms because I always forget the complex ones anyway. They just evade my mind. Essentially, what we're doing is we have our own story. So me telling you the story about my life or a certain aspect of my life. Then we have the analysis. So why is this happening to me? Perhaps it is because of capitalism. Perhaps it is because of patriarchy. Perhaps it is because I live in Australia and we have, I don't know, a $20 an hour minimum wage. Maybe that is why I'm experiencing something like this. That wasn't a brag to my American friends. I think it's all relative, all right, it's all relative. So that we need that level of analysis, like why is this happening to me? And then we also need to back that up with research from different fields of thought. So what are the statistics? What are other people's stories? How can we show that our personal story is also linked to a broader political picture? And we can do that in many different ways. And as you read throughout I'm Army, you'll see that some of us, such as Karen, have very traditional training, academic training, and then use some extra kind of creative writing to merge with this autoethnography. And then we see people, I don't know, well, Madeline has a background in this. Actually, Lily is starting to develop a background in this. So all of us on the screen actually are not a good example. And I know Courtney has a wonderful background as well. $20, yes, our minimum wage is like $19.81 an hour. Yes, and that's for people on a full-time salary, by the way. So then you get like other benefits as well. Normally, if you're in a cafe, it's about $20 cash in hand. All right, there we go. Sorry, that was a question from the audience. It is like, but also we are, I don't know, the conversion rate is different, all right? So don't panic, but yes, we have a very different life in Australia. We also have a great welfare system, not a brag. Okay, so back to whatever I was saying. So we all came at these chapters differently. So it's important to say that there's no one correct way to write an autoethnography, as long as you do have your personal story, the analysis, and backing it up with research. So back to the story. Essentially, when Revolutionaries was just starting out, just around a year ago now, I put a tweet out. We only had like 50 followers on Twitter. So I put a tweet out saying, hey, I want to put this book together. Send me your pitch, send me your proposal for a chapter. Tell me how you became an army. And then link it to some other broader themes. Give me some analysis. Tell me the story. So I put it out and waited for people to apply. And that was a really nerve-wracking part because I had to somehow tap into networks that were broader than my own, because I didn't want to just see more of me, more white 20-something Australians being part of this project. I wanted to see all sorts of army join. But how do I do that without literally hunting people down and being like, hey, you fit like some diversity quota? No, that's not going to happen. I literally had to sit back and wait and hope that I found the right people. And at that point, I also put a call out saying I'm interested in working with co-editors because I didn't want to do this alone. I didn't want it to just be my opinion and experience that is shaping the entire book. And that is how I found Courtney. And then I said, by the way, Courtney, you will also have to write a chapter. And she was like, oh my goodness, okay, if I have to, I'll do it. She's a fantastic writer, by the way, as you can see from her Twitter handle, which is writer_court. She is a great writer. And so a few months later, we went through all the applications, all the proposals, and we selected people with the strongest ones. I think we ended up publishing 8 chapters, I'm going to say, from 9 army, because one chapter is from Tagseen and Nazneen, who are twins. So that's why it's 8 chapters, 8 stories from 9 people. And I can't even remember what the original question was. I hope I've answered some stuff. That is kind of how we've come together. I'm not sure if I've spoken about my chapter at all, but let's just move on to everyone else. So shall I throw over to Courtney? Or Madeline, did you have more specific questions for Courtney at this time?
Yeah, later on. I mean, we can go, who cares about order? We can go any which way on the run sheet if we'd like. But yeah, why don't we throw it over to Courtney in terms of her experience as an editor of the book.
Yeah, so I mean, I did answer the call for editor first, like Willie mentioned, and then was told I needed to write a chapter. And it was like, not that I didn't want to, more just that I get kind of burnt out on writing pretty quickly. And that's kind of how 2020 was, because 2020 was what it was. And it was just a lot harder for me in general to think about, okay, I need to sit down and actually like write something, as opposed to I have material to work with and I just need to edit it. And that's something that I have more, I guess, practice in recent years. So I was like, I feel totally comfortable doing that. But writing again, I have to sit down and like really think about it. I don't typically write about myself. I typically write nonfiction, not about myself. So for me, it was more just trying to, figure out how to do that again and not feel weird about it. So it was a little bit easier for me to edit than it was for me to write. But I think a lot of people, when you sit down to write about yourself, it's hard at first, and eventually you figure out how to do it. But yeah, I think that was like one of the biggest differences for me, was like really being able to focus on editing things. But then every time I would sit down and write, this was in the summer of 2020, and so pandemic was up and down. I was working from home, still working from home, and it was like very challenging to sit down and actually focus on something that was me having to write it and put it together like a cohesive chapter. So I remember I was stuck in the outline phase for a really long time, where it's like I would just sit and stare at that outline and then eventually like write a sentence or two. And then luckily I had a few spurts where I was able to just sit down and just write and finally got it all done. So then we of course go through revisions and whatnot, but I was so glad to get that chapter done. And yeah, it's much easier for me to focus on someone else's work than to like try and focus on telling a cohesive story from myself. And also it was something I had thought about before, but not something I had thought about in terms of making it into something, packaged like a chapter. So I think that was, the biggest challenge for me. I do think it wouldn't have been as crazy if we weren't in the current climate, in the US especially. There's just a lot of negativity all the time, and it's hard to focus on something positive. So I think that answers the question.
Awesome, thank you. So like Walia said earlier, we're kind of nearing, if not already there, with not just the first anniversary of Revolutionaries, but also her call out to chapter proposals for I Am Army. So for everyone else, I wanted to ask the question, what was it like seeing that proposal or that call for pitches? Like, when did you see it? Were you hesitant at first, or did you immediately jump in to this, to wanting to submit a pitch? Just walk us through how you felt upon first hearing about this project and wanting to be a part of it. And if I have to pick on someone, I will, and I'm going to do it, and it's going to be Lily. So go ahead, Lily.
So when I first heard of the call, it was actually about, I would say, my 1.5-year anniversary as an army. So I was thinking of my first official comeback that I witnessed was Map of the Soul persona. So, and during that time when the call was being sent out, I think Map of the Soul 7 was also released by that time. So I was thinking, okay, I wanted to explore more about Carl Jung's theories and concepts. And the concepts that I wanted to explore based on the album is the persona, the shadow, and the ego. So the persona and shadow are, not to give like a psychology lesson, but the persona and shadow are the two archetypes that are introduced by Carl Jung, while the ego is a completely separate concept. So then I decided that, okay, this was something that I was interested in. So I decided to research a little bit, and I was kind of inspired by how BTS were able to show these concepts through their music videos, because in a way, they broke it down very simply, and it was easy, it was accessible to the audience. So I wanted to dive more into the concept. So that was the idea for my chapter. And I also had to, because it's an auto-ethnography, so you have to put your personal story. So I was trying to weave myself in between these theories, which Courtney and Walia can tell you that initially my first draft was very technical. It was more like, this is what BTS says, but nothing about myself. So over a couple of drafts, then slowly we were getting somewhere where we could interweave or have it interwoven, me and the concepts. So yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Let's move over to Karen. How about you?
Okay. So I didn't realize when actually the call first came out. You said that it's nearing the anniversary, but I think I only saw it in March, because I remember there was not really a lot of time between when I first saw it and when I actually sent off a proposal, because I was really excited. So I saw the call for chapters on my timeline, and I don't remember like how I got there, and I couldn't find it again. Um, but I don't think like I only saw it that once, and it was when I was scrolling, just scrolling on Twitter when I was home, because we had been we had a sort of lockdown in early March. So I don't know if I would have seen it actually if it weren't for COVID, and then having to stay at home. Um, Early 2020, I just come back from a couple of conferences in South Korea, and then and I had gone to two conferences. One was a feminist conference, and then the other one was a BTS. It was a Hallyu conference. So at the Hallyu conference, I talked about BTS. At the feminist conference, I talked about an ethnography of myself being a feminist, like a feminist lecturer, and trying to talk about gender issues. And I came back sort of having feeling like that I started on something and that I want to continue on these paths, and then but I wasn't sure how or when, and then also like what kind of things do I want to research. So yeah, then I had all these things in mind, and then when I saw the call for proposals, and then I asked about like what is your feminist? Oh no, what is your army identity like? And it says auto ethnography there. So I was like, is this thing like did it just exist just to like cater to my like musings and anxieties? I think it did. So so I was like, okay, like drew up a proposal, sent it, and then I think Walia's and the other editors' responses were really encouraging. And I was like, okay, I also really want to write. And then I wrote something and then sent it off, and then here we are.
Karen, I have kind of a similar, like tangentially similar experience to seeing the call because at the time I was in a master's program that was really centered around the idea of autoethnography as like the main, like the ultimately culmination and portfolio of the program. And so I was very much in the autoethnographic headspace, and then I saw this call for proposals about Army, like, and an autoethnographic experience, and I was like, let's do it. I mean, I've got a lot to say about Army, so I personally was one of those that immediately jumped in because I knew I had a lot to think about with my own experience. So, okay, I think we'll move on to more questions, I think specifically about the process for how everyone took to, wow, words. The process that everyone had in developing their chapters, and if there was anything that was easiest to write and anything that was most challenging to write. And anyone can start us off, but I will pick again if I have to.
All right, I'll do it. Here I am. Let's just keep this order instead of picking out people. All right. So in terms of, I think this is really interesting for me to think about, because by the time I sat down to write my contribution for I Am Army, so I'd started planning I Am Army in January 2020. And as Karen mentioned, like she put in her proposal in March. So I think we initially put the call out in February, and then I wasn't satisfied with like how many responses we got, and I was really concerned with that. So I think we extended the deadline, and I definitely know by the end of the start of April, we had selected everyone, and then we needed like first drafts by the end of May with the idea, or maybe even earlier in May. And then I think our original timeline was to finish writing everything and have it ready to be typeset at the end of June. Now, naturally, even though for most of us, the pandemic had progressed quite rapidly at the start of the year, I know in Australia, it wasn't until the end of March that we started going through like lockdown or shutdown procedures. So it for me, it felt like I was a bit separate from the pandemic, and then gradually it came to my front door. And then definitely throughout June, I know there were a lot of racial tensions in America, which then kind of made me, even in Australia, feel like the entire world was on fire. So we had like the pandemic, which was fueling a lot of xenophobic hatred and fear. I guess that is the definition of xenophobia anyway, throughout the world. Of course, our economy here in Australia was crashing, and I'm sure the same is for everyone here. Our economies were tanking, people were losing their jobs. It was very stressful. And then to put the Black Lives Matter peaceful protest movement and the subsequent police brutality in response on top of that, and then how that felt throughout the entire Twitterverse, because of course we see and receive all these messages instantly through the internet, so it feels as if we are right there. I think that on top of trying to write a story about ourselves and our army identity while we're watching BTS come to terms with the fact that they can't tour, and I know that was really hard for them. I think it was harder for them than it was for ARMY, because the way that we engage with them did not change at all. And I mean, for me in Australia, I was not going to see them live on tour anyway. So it made no difference to me. Yeah, a bit of a sad, it's not a brag this time. It wasn't like the minimum wage. This one's a sad one. But, you know, so watching BTS go through that was really painful. So there was a lot of compounding factors. And of course, we all had lives, and some of us got really sick as well and lost loved ones. So I had been through this whole process with every single one of our writers. I'd been encouraging everyone to keep writing. We ended up pushing back the deadline to the end of July. And then in the month of June, I got incredibly sick and I could not even look after this book project. I had to let everything go, and I literally could not get out of bed for 30 days. So then come July, I was working on another book project when I realized that actually I Am Army is about to be due, and I hadn't written anything for it. So after this whole process of really being there for people, I know Courtney's chapter was finished, Lily's chapter was finished before June, Karen's chapter was finished, I think even Madeline's chapter was finished. So these people, everyone here on the screen already had their chapters finished. And here I was needing to write my chapter about myself. I think at this point, I really started to worry, because I already feel like I take up a lot of space with my position at the company. I feel like I get an opportunity to tell my story a lot. And I feel like I already have a book published called Idle Limerence for sale on the website if anyone wants to buy it. But also that already, even though that's a story about Echo, my personal story, as you can probably tell, is all throughout that book as well. So here I was sitting down thinking, how can I write a chapter that is different to everyone else's, because also all the themes explored are so universal, even though, you know, the things that we individually experience might differ. But everything is so universal. How do I say something that isn't already being said? And how do I say something that I haven't already said? And then how do I turn this into a transformative experience for me? Not that I really sit down and like have a to-do list, like, oh, it's got to be transformative. But, you know, it's like, how do I turn this into a good process so I can actually pump this out in 3 days, which I inevitably did. Because of my tight deadline. That wasn't a brag. That was a very painful moment in my life, because I also contributed the introduction and the conclusion as well, on top of, you know, coordinating everyone and working with Courtney. By the way, Courtney, absolute legend. I think she worked for 72 hours straight editing everyone's work. Yeah, she's laughing now, but we were crying then. It was, yeah, amazing, Courtney. So anyway, back to me, my story. So essentially my chapter, I Am Army, I Am Revolutionary, I really wanted to focus on a story that I hadn't yet told, which is almost the story of how I came to find what I'm calling my revolutionary path, which does involve setting up my company and writing my first book. So I kind of share my army identity as the revolutionary identity and how that all came to be. And that was very hard for me to do, because it's like, and I think everyone struggles with this. You can't say everything in one chapter or even one book, but you're going to want to. So when you're told to tell the story about you, it's like, well, what do I put in and what do I leave out? And I think that's why we have to go through many rounds of editing and being very specific, having a very clear theme. Like for Lily's, it was all to do with her persona, her shadow, and her ego. But for Lily, her struggle was actually even getting to that point of talking about her persona, her shadow, her ego. At the start, she gave me a draft that talked about RM's persona, Sugar's shadow, J-Hope's ego. I was like, this is like a story about BTS. We need it to be a story about you, Lily. So Lily and I had kind of opposite problems. It's like, I can tell the story about me, but it's like, how do I make it interesting for everyone else? And how do I actually show my army story in a way that is beneficial? that was what I really struggled with, and I promptly had to get over it because I had a deadline, and this is what we ended up with. So it was interestingly, it was a harder experience than I thought. I thought it would be easier, mostly because I just helped everyone else do their chapters and I was full of it. So it was a humbling experience, but I'm glad I went through, and I hope my story can contribute and like hold space just as well as everyone else's chapters in the book. All right, Courtney, it's your turn.
Yeah. I mean, like I had mentioned, just with the, the state that everything was in when we were trying to do this, it was kind of a back and forth of like, oh, it looks like it might start to get better, and then it looks like it's going to get worse again. Then we get to the summer and we have all of our, problems with police brutality. And of course that stuff just continues even till now. We have early 2021, things are still bad. And, just that whole time period of like, even though this isn't affecting me directly, because I have that privilege, it's still me stressing out watching everybody else have to go through a hard time where their family is sick, or they're, trying to go to protests and potentially getting hurt, or, just either losing their jobs, all sorts of things. Like, I've been very lucky that my family was not experiencing that. We all got to keep our jobs. Some of us got to work from home. We were very lucky, but it was very difficult watching everyone else go through that. And so it was kind of like, I don't know, like secondhand embarrassment is a thing. And it was kind of like secondhand stress almost, where it was like, I'm watching all this happening. I'm doom scrolling on the internet all the time. And there's a 24-hour news cycle, and I can't pay attention to it anymore. Or I'm going to go a little, it's going to affect me too much. And I'm not going to be able to, do my own day job stuff or this project. And I remember getting down close to some deadlines for this and for other projects too, where I was like, I don't know if I'm going to make it just because it was so, such a stressful time. Also, my grandmother had just gone into a nursing home. So it's like, we have family stress. We have just all the things are piling on top of each other. And I'm like, just trying to survive basically. And, we pushed our deadlines back, like William mentioned. That helped me a lot personally. I think it helped some of our other writers a lot too, because we just weren't quite ready. And, so that whole process was just, obviously it was a learning process. We didn't expect it to go that way. You never can really predict this kind of stuff. I think given under more normal circumstances, we still would have run into challenges that we didn't anticipate. It was just, these were challenges we just definitely could not have anticipated. Like there's just no way we could have predicted how difficult it was going to be to try and get all that together under the strain that was 2020. And so for me, like I said, the editing for other people was pretty easy because I'm dealing with other people's work, and I'm just kind of helping guide them, or editing, and even the copy editing that we mentioned, like me doing it really in a big marathon. That was me like not understanding how long it was going to take, because I typically edit short form. I've edited some manuscripts in the past, but they were like in bits. So it's like, here, edit the first third, here, edit the middle third, and then the final third. So that was the first time I kind of really sat down and just did an entire book. And so that was me overestimating, like, yeah, it should only take this amount of time. So it was a rough like weekend, but it was still like a learning process, and it was still, part of this whole experience, which to me is still, even if it's not always a fun experience, you still learn something. So it was, definitely a lot of different challenges from a lot of different areas. For me personally, the writing portion, the writing process itself, like I said, it's a little harder for me to write about myself just because I don't typically do that. And it's more just like, I just don't really know what to say. So it's like sitting down and figuring out what to say in a way that makes sense to other people. The easiest part for me was probably some of my chapter actually, I wouldn't say, it's not like a huge crossover, but there is a little bit of crossover between my chapter and the project that I did at the BTS conference earlier in 2020, because that was like a survey of other Army and asking about how BTS impacted your mental health and how the stories in BTS's work impacted your mental health, things like that. And I was talking about bibliotherapy in relation to BTS and how those two can kind of be related. And that whole project kind of got me thinking on that same track, which actually ended up helping me write that chapter, because even though there wasn't a ton of crossover there, I still had to write a whole new chapter. It kind of gave me a foundation. So for me, that was sort of the easiest starting point. But everything after that, it was like, okay, now what do I do? But yeah, there was definitely a lot of just, unprecedented challenges that we could not have foreseen. But it was still a learning process, and I still think it was, we still did really well, even with the pushing deadlines back. Who cares if you got to push the deadline back? It's our deadline. So
that is the perk to having your own publishing company. Because could you imagine if we were working for someone else? Oh, like we literally had to draw up a new contract because we voided it because we didn't. I mean, it was just, I think we were very fortunate that we could make that judgment call. And I think for everyone to, even people like who had already finished their chapter, to stop thinking about it for a whole month. Because the other thing to mention is that I know we just experienced BTS releasing B, which was a byproduct of, or in response to, the pandemic. I know Karen put some stuff about the pandemic into her chapter right before the deadline, just to reflect what we'd been through. But most of us, I think it's not unfortunate, but it was just interesting that we had just went through an unprecedented pandemic, something that we all experienced for the first time from all of our different countries and our different backgrounds. We just experienced the same thing at the same time, but we couldn't properly sit with it and reflect it in our chapters because they were already underway. And I think even at this point, like last year, I tried to do some writing in response to the pandemic and I still couldn't do it. So I think there just wasn't enough of that space and time to really reflect on that. And I think it would be interesting, by the way, random plug, and I know we'll get back to this plug at the end again, but I Am Army is part of a series. So there will be another I Am Army this year, and the calls will be going out in the next few months. So it will be interesting to see what pandemic stories arise, especially for Army who became Army during the pandemic. I would be interested in that. But I just think it's interesting. We all went through this pandemic together, but it did not actually reflect in our chapters except for Karen's. And I think I put some stuff in the concluding chapter just because I was able to write right before the deadline. So I think it's okay. I think it's kind of a record of who we were before and kind of during the pandemic, but it would be interesting. I would love to reconnect with everyone and have this discussion when we can actually reflect just on how we've changed as Army through the pandemic. And actually, I think that's a question that's coming up. So excuse me, Madeline, I'm just hijacking your whole segment. Lily, let's go. It's your turn.
So Walia helped me to have a head start because she mentioned earlier that my main strength at the time of writing this chapter was the research kind of. I was writing about RM's persona, I was writing about Sugar's shadow, I was writing about J-Hope's ego. But what I struggled with was writing about myself. So what Walia mentioned earlier about how I was writing about, it was easy to research about someone else or something that there's so much of information of. But it was hard to write about myself because it's like I needed to face what I was feeling or what I was going through. So to give some context, at the time I was writing this chapter, I was in the middle of doing my postgraduate. I'm still in the middle of it right now. And my background is in law. So hence you can understand a little about why it was easy to dive into the research part of things. It was easy to kind of okay, I'm going to tell you about this concept. I'm going to tell you why it was presented this way, how it was presented. But writing about myself is something that you don't really do in law. I don't think you put your own opinion unless it's backed up by research. So it was a challenge for me to be able to understand, okay, I can write about myself in between these concepts that I'm trying to talk about. And I think the pitch came at a very important time for me because at the time I was still in between exams and it was very hard to process things because I think at the time I was done with about 20 mock exams and I still had the actual papers going on, so it was just very messy. So in a way the chapter was a relief for me to be able to write about what I was feeling. So I have to give a shout out to Wadia and both Courtney because both of them really reminded me to write about myself rather than so much focus on BTS. So that's for me. Yeah.
Karen,
I'm assuming I'm next. Yeah. Okay. I'll just talk about the highlights then about the writing process. I'm really a big fan of personal essays and personal essays. So people like Rebecca Solnit, Patti Smith, and Olivia Lang. I just finished reading Olivia Lang just before like the call for papers. So I'd been like really into that kind of um, the atmosphere of writing, like writing about a particular topic. So Patti Smith is about her rock career or music career, Rebecca Solnit about different things. But they ground the topic around their own personal experiences. So I thought I would like to sort of try out that kind of writing strategy because I think it's a really great storytelling style. So for me, the process of writing the I Am Army chapter was really because I was really enjoying myself. So it kind of went smoothly for me. And Walia mentioned that I put in bits about the pandemic, and the main reason for that is I opened up with like a Cinderella scene. You need a catchy opening line, right? So my first version was about like I say Cinderella, but I just thought about it actually. It was a scene about not wearing shoes, so losing my shoes because we were all like staying inside and we didn't know how long we would be staying at home for. So I came into the chapter with that story. I think the second highlight is that it's kind of daunting to write like 6,000 plus words if you don't have a solid structure. And fortunately, like the BTS discography, like they have a particular pattern or they have a particular style in kind of ordering the way that they do their songs, right? To tell a particular story. So there's an intro, usually there's an interlude, and then there's an outro. So I looked at that structure and I saw, okay, this is a great structure to kind of like root my story in. And so it divided the story into different sections. And so it's easier to write in sections rather than like a whole thing at one go. So that writing process was made easier because there was a sort of a strong structure to follow. Then finally, I the bits that I most enjoyed about writing the chapter were the bits where I was transported back to, for instance, like in a moment into the concert, like being part of the Purple Ocean. So writing that, I was like, wow, yeah, I'm back there. And also walking the streets of Myeongdong in Seoul, and then thinking about as I was walking around these commercial areas, seeing BTS on banners and adverts, and thinking about, yeah, someday I would like to be a professor of BTS studies. And so, like, sprinkling all of that in and then coming out with a chapter that I can be proud of. It was really like a good experience. Yeah.
Awesome. So if I were to answer this question myself, and I will, because assumably as also an author in the book and not just the host of this, I will be answering these questions. For me, the easiest part, it was very easy for me to write for this book because I just find I myself am a very introverted, or like, yeah, not introverted, introspective thinker. And I reflect a lot on my own journeys in life. So to be able to put that to paper, it was just like brain immediately, like words. If anything, what was the most challenging part was just specifically this part in my life, in my chapter that I wrote about, which was an abusive relationship. It was a toxic situation that truthfully, I might have thought at the time I was already in a good place over it, but I think with any sort of traumatic experience, and I'll just speak for myself, oftentimes when I've gone through something like a low point in life or something really rough, I don't quite know how healed I am from it until way later, because there will be times where it's like, oh yeah, no, I'm doing great. And then a couple of like maybe months later, I'm like, no, wait, this is me doing great. I was still not in a good place then. So to kind of, like, at the time I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to be ripping open these wounds to be part of this book? But I found throughout the process of writing my chapter and seeing it go from pitch to published, that was a huge part of my healing process in and of itself. Because, I mean, relatively speaking, yeah, it had only just been like a year, barely a year and a couple of months between the abusive relationship ending and my seeing the proposal, like the call for pitches for the first time. So, yeah, if anything, I would just say it was challenging to face that part of myself that realized, oh, I'm not as over this as I thought, or I'm not as healed from this as I thought, because then I saw my healing in real time happening as part of the book. So that was very special for me. Moving on to the next question, I also want to, oh, thank you. There was a comment about enjoying my chapter. I really appreciate that. Before I move on to our next questions, I just wanted to remind the audience that you're also welcome to throw any questions in our live stream chats for us to take a look at. So I wanted to actually go back to that idea that was brought up about the pandemic experience, and how has everyone's experience as an army changed, or if at all, now with this pandemic having happened, or happening still for some of us.
All right, I can take it from here. All right, so I've since seeing your question yesterday, I've been thinking a little bit about how things have changed for me as an army throughout the pandemic, and I think what I will say is that the point I am at now is probably the same point I was at 1 year ago, and the only thing that changed is that I definitely hit an incredibly low point between the months of, say, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. Yes, October. There we go. Just those months. Just during the real, and I know the pandemic was experienced differently throughout all of our countries, but definitely around the time the pandemic hit, I experienced Army really coming together and feeling more connected. Of course, at the start of the year, interestingly, we had Connect BTS, which is an interesting concept in itself, because then that some of that had to be shut down or changed because of the pandemic. But it was interesting that they were already exploring the theme of connection. And of course, in fandom, that is one of our main themes. That is the way that we operate, through connection. And that's how we understand each other and ourselves. So I thought that was interesting that was already happening. And then the theme between BTS and Army throughout all of 2020 did definitely become connection, and in different ways. And I think that, again, mostly is for BTS finding different ways to connect with Army, not Army finding different ways to connect with BTS, because we're still consuming their content in very similar ways. Of course, we had more concerts, we had more interactions, like through VLive and stuff, which is always welcomed. So I was observing everyone in the fandom experiencing a lot more connection, and a lot more people were finding BTS because it also aligned with them, I think, what would have already been an amazing year for them as they continue to break through into the US with things like carpool karaoke. Like, the amount of people that I've seen online talking about becoming an Army because of that is phenomenal. So, and I also think because of the pandemic, BTS have become bigger than they could have without the pandemic, to some degrees. Like, I think because they really were already primed so well with their parasocial interactions through the internet, with their uses of all these platforms. I think a lot of other musicians and artists struggled to make that full transition over from touring to trying to make money and engage with their fans online. But I think BTS were already primed and Army were ready for it. That's just a random note. So everyone was experiencing a lot more connection. And I'll make my point very short now. I was feeling disconnected. I was watching everyone else go through all of this. Wow, I'm so connected. Look at this, this concert. And I remember there was Bang Bang Con in June, and I almost didn't go. Like, I was at a point where I was like, I can't even BTS. Like, don't even like look at me. I don't want to be part of this anymore. I was just, for some reason, I just felt, and I mean, it had nothing to do with BTS and very little to do with ARMY. That's just how I was feeling at the time as a result of everything else that was going on. So I found that very interesting then, that the one thing to pull me through that all was all of you in my inbox asking me why the flip I haven't gotten your draft back to you, and asking me all these questions about your chapters. So even though I was feeling incredibly disconnected, what I actually found through that period of time was a connection to all of the authors of this book when I wasn't able to establish or maintain a connection with anyone else because of my health complications. So for me, that was how my life changed as an ARMY. I became incredibly disconnected. And then as we've kind of come out of that really dark period over the American summer, and of course, it still remains dark. I just want to be clear on that. But I just felt like that was incredibly, because we had no idea. We thought the pandemic was just about to end in Australia. We were told, yep, it's over, it's all good. And then it, keeps coming back. I think I've found a way to move through that through connecting individually to ARMY instead of at one stage I was trying to connect more broadly to BTS and ARMY. And this way that I am operating now, it's more like I have very strong personal relationships with ARMY, and that's how I experience BTS now and experience a genuine connection. And that's how it's changed for me throughout the pandemic. Courtney, over to you.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're talking about with, theme of connection. And I'm, also watched a lot of people, especially on Twitter, that's where I'm most active, I guess, really be more connected within fandom. But I also kind of echo some of that disconnect. And I think that is a very personal thing because I've watched some of my friends be super connected and, super involved in just fandom activities in general and keeping up with every piece of content that BTS releases, which we know is a lot. And for me, it was kind of the opposite too throughout a lot of 2020, just because of everything that was going on, but also just, here and there, either personally or watching other people kind of go through fandom toxicity, which I don't want to bring up too much of that negativity, but it's there. And watching some of that happen and having to watch friends go through some of that, it really kind of makes you want to distance yourself a little bit from fandom, and not from your friends in fandom, but from like just the general public fandom, or not general public, but like within the fandom. You kind of just pull back a little bit. You pull back a little bit from social media and go, okay, maybe I don't really want to be as active on this platform right now because of everything that I'm seeing, not just within the world, but within my own fandom when the toxicity comes up. And that will always kind of make me feel bad, even if it's not directed towards me or if it's directed towards someone I know and they're having a hard time. That is, something that really characterized the last year, I feel like, for me, because when there's a lot of stuff happening in the real world and it's affecting how I feel and my mental health is not necessarily the best, and I'm watching toxicity in fandom happen like every week or something, I tend to retract a little bit. And I also even ended up pulling back from BTS content in some ways, not because of them in any way, but because I like to watch that when I'm happy. And I know for a lot of people, that's something that you can use to pull you through a rough time. It's been that for me too, but it doesn't always fit every situation. So for me, I kept finding myself pushing off some of that, what I would call my normal ARMY activities, I guess. I was pushing off some of that. And like, I'm going to save this for later. I'm going to do this later. I'm going to do this when I feel better. I'm going to do this when everything is a little bit more calm. And so basically, obviously, we didn't expect pandemic to keep happening, but everything just keeps escalating. And so throughout the entire year, I feel like I missed a lot of stuff, which is not normal for me. So this is what I've been in ARMY for 6 years now. This is probably the last year was the most disconnected I'd been. And it's just because it was a different climate, and that's not even a comment on the broader fandom or anything, because we know that the fandom is so huge that the toxic part is small, but there's enough of them that they really get to you sometimes. So you have to like really control your experience. Otherwise it can really affect how you want to interact and whether or not you want to interact. And for me, that was really sad because Twitter and fandom and everything was something I was so used to interacting with. And so not really interacting like that this year has been kind of weird for me, or this past year, not like this current year. But yeah, so for me, it was more that kind of like going back and forth between maybe I should stay off Twitter for a while. Well, I'll go, I actually had another Twitter account, not the current one, this Writer Court one. That's like my professional Twitter that wasn't supposed to have anything to do with BTS. And then it ended up being pretty much everything BTS. So I kind of migrated because this environment was better for me than my fandom account was. So, thankfully I was able to make other connections and have smaller groups of friends who were in fandom that I was able to rely on that. And so we kind of kept our little groups to themselves. And so for me, that was a big change, but I can't say that I really mind it that much. I don't mind having the smaller groups. I don't mind interacting with, smaller friend groups instead of trying to be super involved in the fandom at large. So yeah, it's definitely been a different experience. And even just like concerts, obviously we were going to have concerts in the US, they were all postponed. That was kind of the one thing that a lot of us were looking forward to after the like pandemic stuff started happening and other things were being really difficult. It was a rough year even that early on. So those being postponed, I know, was really disappointing for a lot of people. And I remember watching like the digital streamed concerts at home by myself because my friend could not come over because pandemic. So we're like texting each other while we're watching it. She lives in the same city as me, but we couldn't even see each other because of the pandemic. So it was just a very different experience that I think, there's never going to be another year like it. And in some ways that's really good because we don't want it to be like this. But, at the end of the day, I did have my little small pockets that I was able to stay in, which I feel more comfortable in. And I think that's important for, everyone to find their spaces within fandom that they feel the most comfortable in, because you don't have to necessarily put yourself out there on the social platforms all the time.
Lily, it's you.
So when during this whole thing, pandemic happened, I actually launched my Twitter account last year in April. So that was kind of when things were starting to go a bit crazy. So initially, I before that I didn't have a Twitter. The last Twitter I had was maybe like 4 years ago, and then I deleted it, and then I didn't think of coming back to Twitter. So that's kind of like opposite of what Courtney was saying. But because a certain CEO mentioned that, oh, it's good that you should have a Twitter because then you can, share your work and also communicate with other armies and also, learn more about fandom and things like that, follow accounts, be connected with people. So I started my Twitter account last year in April. And so it was interesting to see because I think when the pandemic started, the way that I saw BTS content, it was like BTS content helped me to keep track of the months. I think when the pandemic started, all the days kind of started to blend in together, and it was getting kind of scary because it's like sometimes suddenly it's like, oh, it's like a week has passed or like a month already, and then it was just really difficult. So in a way, BTS releasing their content and they released a lot last year, so it helped me to keep track of like, oh, okay, it's been a week, like it's been a month, or like, oh, D2 came out in this month, or like this came out in this month, and writing was also always been like a release for me. So whenever there was like a new thing coming out, and I was like, okay, maybe there's something I can write about. So in the end, my year during this whole pandemic was being like, I kept track of the year based on BTS content and based on how I responded to their content. In terms of my journey as an army, how it's being changed by the pandemic, I would say, firstly, it's about keeping track of time. And secondly, I think with the pandemic, it caused a lot of like anxiety. So for me, I think it was very difficult to not run to something. So a lot of things became like a distraction from what I was supposed to do. So I was supposed to be preparing for exams, but then I was so freaked out about my exams that I was trying to run to every single other thing. So I needed to balance between enjoying BTS content, enjoying the content from artists that I support versus using them as a distraction. So I think that was what happened during this whole pandemic. So over to you, Corinne or Madeline.
Right, thanks. I think I relate to so much of what the others have said, so I won't repeat the same points. I'll add in some things personal to me, um, some some things that have developed because of the pandemic and wouldn't otherwise. So one of the things is that I think, as with banana bread, as with cooking during the pandemic, as with knitting and finding new hobbies, I think what happened was COVID forced a lot of us to kind of find creative ways of like occupying ourselves and keeping ourselves like mentally sound, keeping ourselves active. So for me in particular with the fandom, with ARMY and BTS, is that um, I can't bake, I can't cook, I can write. So what happened was I enjoy reading BTS fanfics, and I found a community of fanfic writers online, and sort of became involved in that community. And it's a very supportive community, small group of people. We talk every day or almost every day on Discord. We talk about writing. We talk about the particular sort of each person's experience with the pandemic. So we're from all over the world. So that's something that is like really something that I'm very happy to have discovered, but it wouldn't have come about if not for COVID. So that's one thing. Another thing is that as I think it's a common experience for everyone in the world that when you are sort of forced, or when life has changed so drastically, you kind of feel demotivated. You kind of feel sort of depressed and down with the state of the world, right? And and it has helped as an army to know that BTS has gone through the same things. And when they released Dynamite and when they released Life Goes On, they are showing us, as they have always shown us, that they too go through the same things, but they are sort of motivated by service, in that service like providing sort of hope and motivation for army. So it showed me really resilience, things like doing things for the good of everyone, sort of pushing through despite this setbacks, finding the beauty in the glass. So as always, um, BTS manages to inspire, and this last year was a really like weird situation, but they'd done the same thing, only like in different circumstances for different reasons, but they show us life goes on. And so you are like exiting 2020, or like surviving 2020 with that kind of mentality, like life goes on, so you have to go on. BTS is going on, so you have to do that as well. Yeah.
For me, in terms of my experience of being an army with this pandemic, I had a similar experience to Wally and Courtney, in that there was a point in time where I was just like, I can't do it, and that was really scary for me. Like, there were a lot of other factors going on. In addition to it just being about the pandemic, I ended up leaving my master's program, and that in the middle of a pandemic was either the smartest thing to do or the worst thing to do. I could never really tell at the moment. Ultimately, at this point, I'm feeling very good and happy with my decision, but all of that kind of compounded, especially with the pandemic, to really, one, send me spiraling into a horrible state of mental health. I actually did write a piece for our Bulletproof editorial, shameless self-promo there, about when the doors to the magic shop close. And it was this idea that, like, seeing a lot of people stay connected over BTS throughout this quarantine and this pandemic, it's very interesting because, yes, I see a lot of discourse about how BTS was the thing to keep everyone connected when we were so physically apart, or a lot of discourse about how for a lot of armies, Map of the Soul 7 was the last sense, like it reminds them of that sense of normalcy before the pandemic started. And for me, I personally could not relate to that. And it only essentially drove me further into that depression, I guess, because it was like, no, these are supposed to be my happy people. Like, this is supposed to be my happy place, but it's just reminding me of what the quarantine, what the pandemic has taken away from me. So that was really hard for me and to navigate with my army identity. But eventually, I think, I mean, it was Dynamite that was the turning point for me. You know, meanwhile, everyone's on my Twitter timeline like, oh no, Mott's era is coming to an end. This is so sad. On the inside, I was like, I mean, yes, it's sad to see an era come to a close, but also whenever I think about this era, I just think about like X, Y, and Z, all this traumatic, awful stuff that happened to me with the onset of the pandemic and leaving grad school and everything. And so thankfully, Dynamite was the turning point, and then I was able, it rekindled a lot of things. And then right afterwards, I Am Army came out, and I think all of that, like, it really pulled me through, truthfully, and pulled me through not just in terms of the pandemic, but pulled me through back into loving my army identity again. And I think one last thing I'll say is kind of to Courtney's point about fandom toxicity. Like, I feel I feel quiet now, like in terms of me being army. Like, I'm not as loud about it, like on Twitter or things. And sometimes I worry, like, do people think that I don't care about BTS anymore? But also, who cares what people think? Because obviously I still do, but it's just become such a personal thing for me that at this point in time now, it's like less about like sharing it with others and more just about how what they are to me, if that makes sense. So in the interest of time, we are going to answer just two of us, I believe, are going to take on a question from the audience. How do you keep your army personas genuine and enjoyable when you have to explore them through work? I found that each time I turn something I love into a job, part of the magic is gone. So I'll actually turn it over to you, Walia, if you want to take it on from, yeah.
Great, I can do that. All right, hi Trish. P. Mitkovska, yes, Trish Mitkovska. Hello, how are you? So how do you keep your army personas genuine and enjoyable when you have to explore them through work? That is an interesting question. Well, firstly, here at Revolutionaries, I mean, Madeline and I are talking to this because it is our professional work as well. And this question is coming from our team member. So thanks so much, Trish. It doesn't ever feel like, I just let it be. Whoever I am, whatever my army persona looks like on the day, that is what it is. And I don't try and question it. I don't try and control it. I have different things. And I think we've already kind of alluded to and spoken about the fact that the Twitter timeline can be a really toxic place for us. Personally, I look at Twitter I just only ever have my notifications loaded. I never look at the actual timeline, and Madeline often has to send me tweets so I know what's going on. So I find a few different ways to actually manage my daily life in a way that makes being an army enjoyable. So as I mentioned before, what's enjoyable for me is connecting directly with other people like this, getting to use my platform to connect with other army, engaging with BTS content and then sharing that back with my team on a group chat and with other friends. And that's the limits of what I do as an army. And that's how I keep it enjoyable. So I think we all have different patterns and routines and ways of engaging as army. But I don't question it too much. I am army just as I am right now. I don't need to do anything. And that is the beauty of being an army. You don't need to do anything to be an army except for love BTS. Like, really, that's the only thing. There's no other requirement. So Trish also says, I found each time I turn something I love into a job, part of the magic is gone. I think the cool thing for us at Revolutionaries is that we are building a company together. And the cool thing about being an army is that we all get to dictate what that looks like. We all get to create our own experiences, and BTS give us space to do that. And because there are no rules, it does mean that if we don't like something, we can change. And I would encourage any army out there or anyone, if you're experiencing a persona or an identity trait or a pattern or a routine that you don't like, change it. the fandom is very forgiving in that respect, especially if you don't engage with it. Because or especially if you just surround yourself with people who are like-minded, like our team at Revolutionaries, who we all have different ways of being ARMY, but we all come together and accept that we're all just a bit weird and we all love BTS, and that's what matters most. So, I think I definitely didn't love being an ARMY through a lot of 2020, but that was because I was struggling with myself as well. So we've got to remember that our ARMY persona is our regular persona as well for the most of us, unless we are people who like to keep it incredibly separate and hidden. For me, it's part of my professional work. So everything that I display into the world is who I am on the inside, and I am fortunate for that, but I understand it could get pretty weird for people who are trying to keep their ARMY persona at an arm's length from their professional selves or private life. Madeline, over to you.
Okay, yes. I will also say, actually, one of the things that got me through being an ARMY in 2020 was also this. I might have just talked about like, oh, I want to keep it to myself. But when I say this, I mean my work with Revolutionaries. Like, to be able to now apply my ARMY identity in a professional context, I think, if anything, I would just, like, that's what also helped me get back into things, and find a new way to, instead of thinking of it as, how do I keep my ARMY persona genuine with work, I think about it as, how do I keep my work genuine to myself with my ARMY persona? As that, like, that's basically reiterating what Walia said, just with different words. But I also know that Karen wants to answer this question as well, so I'm going to let her do so quickly, and then we'll wind down.
Hi. Sorry to hijack the conversation, but as you can see, my son is awake, and so I have to go after this. And before I go, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's watching for spending your time here with us, and for the question. Also, happy Revolutionary anniversary, happy Revolt Festa Day. So the question is, how do we keep our ARMY personas enjoyable when you kind of mix them up in work? I wanted to answer this because I see it in the opposite direction, in that I have a job that I really enjoy, but it's not always enjoyable. I have a job that I really love, and that allows me to do research in whatever field or whatever subject that interests me. And so I see it as a way, so it can be very boring. It can be very intensive. You have to put in long hours, etc. But what being ARMY adds to that is that it adds sort of enjoyment. It adds sort of kind of magic, because BTS is magic. And when you're you're researching BTS in the fandom, you sort of absorb that kind of magic as well. So I think for me, doing work on BTS actually imbues that kind of work with a lot of meaning that is positive, and that sort of makes me determined to kind of see it through. So I would say I'm really glad to be an academic who can research on BTS and ARMY, and then I think that my job and this ARMY persona really complement each other and enrich each other. So that's all I wanted to say. I have to log off now, so thank you very much. Bye, everybody.
All right, thank you, Karen. And I mean, this also segues into us wrapping up in general, which, to echo what Karen said, thank you everyone who's joined us today. And these are just some of the authors of I Am ARMY, and these are just some of the stories within the book. So big shout out to all of the authors who could not join us today. Be sure to check out their stories in I Am ARMY, which continues to be available for purchase on Amazon or Revolutionaries, even Barnes & Noble, Book Depository, depending on where you are in the world. And it is linked below in all of our live streams and in the description box. I also wanted to let everyone know that this was actually also part of the Revolt Book Club Discord server, or the Revolt Book Club, which is on our Discord server. So that is also linked in the descriptions of our live streams. So if you liked what you saw today, you want to keep discussing any and all of our titles, especially I Am Army or any of our other titles, please do join the Discord community. There is a separate channel for each book, each title, and yeah, it's a party in there. One last bit of an announcement is that we are also searching for a Revolt Book Club coordinator, as well as a community engagement manager. So if you love books, if you love BTS, if you love Army, if you love what we do at Revolutionaries and you want to get involved, please check us out. It is the call for applicants is on our website, revolutionaries.com.au, and it's under Join Us. So help us continue to talk about books on our Discord server. And as Walia said earlier, I Am Army is going to be a series, so keep an eye out for calls for submissions in the coming months. Any other last thoughts from anyone?
I just wanted to say thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. This is the first event as part of our FESTA, so if you're watching live, please stay tuned. I am up next in about 45 minutes, no pressure, and then we will have Madeline about an hour or so after I finish, and a few other of our directors, and this goes through until Sunday morning Australian time, so just under 24 hours from now. So if you'd like to connect with us, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and on our website as well. You will find more information about what times each of our panels are. Please come along and support that. But also please follow our writers. Their Twitter handles are next to their name here on the screen. Follow them on Twitter, stay connected, because they also do amazing writing outside of Revolutionaries, and also they do write and contribute. Lily and Courtney are part of our writing and editing team at Revolutionaries as well. Funny how everything works out that way. But they also do a lot of amazing work in their own right. So I would really strongly recommend that you support all of them and continue to support Revolutionaries. Yes, and here's a concluding comment from Deanne. If you haven't got I Am Army, do go get it. A really inspiring book. And I think that's great one to end on. Yes, please buy our book, support us, and support Army voices and stories. Anyone else? All right, I think they're saying no. All right, well, just give us a big smile, everyone, because we finished, we made it. We did our first live book club of the year. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you all very soon.